JonBenét Ramsey was murdered in a horrific way. Many injuries to this little girl's body. We have the x-ray of her skull, which shows a fracture, a massive one.
Right. This is an 8-inch skull fracture. So we're talking a major blunt force. This is just a massive blow.
But the ultimate cause of death was strangulation with something called a garrote.
It was the day after Christmas, but inside the Ramsey house, the holiday spirit had vanished. On the morning of December 26, 1996, in Boulder, Colorado, the neighborhood was quiet. Snow blanketed the roofs, and garlands still hung across porches as the world remained in a post-holiday calm. Inside 755 15th Street, the Ramsey mansion stood silent too, but not from peace. At 5:52 a.m., a 911 call broke the calm. A woman's voice, panicked, high-pitched and breathless, reached the emergency operator. That voice belonged to Patsy Ramsey, a former beauty queen. The daughter she was calling about was JonBenét Ramsey, a 6-year-old with a portfolio of beauty pageant crowns. Within a few hours, however, the initial report of a kidnapping would evolve into something far more complex. The house was meant to be a secure location for investigation, but that protocol was not maintained. Friends, neighbors, and police moved in and out of the home. Coffee was served as voices echoed through the living room, actions that complicated later forensic review. An unusually long ransom note lay on the kitchen staircase, but an initial search of the home yielded nothing. It wasn't until just after 1 p.m. that John Ramsey made his way into the basement. He returned carrying his daughter. The scene was immediately understood to be gravely serious, involving materials reportedly found at the scene and signs consistent with restriction. From that moment, everything changed. The case was no longer viewed as a straightforward abduction. Investigators suspected it involved far more. What followed was not a quiet investigation, but a storm of public attention. Media vans arrived, and talk shows began to debate the family's behavior before official reports were even processed. America didn't just observe, it became engrossed in the case. This was not just another tragic event. It concerned a young girl whose life was tragically cut short in her own home around Christmas, and the focus of the investigation quickly turned toward those inside the house. There's a reason this case has never faded from the public consciousness. It was not just a tragedy. It was a puzzle made of human contradictions. How could a family appearing so broken also seem composed? How could a father, after discovering his daughter under such circumstances, appear to show little outward emotion? How could a mother's plea for help sound, to some, strangely theatrical? And how could a 9-year-old boy, Burke Ramsey, reportedly sleep through the commotion, the search, and the eventual screams, only to eat breakfast calmly the next morning? The incident was troubling, but what came after was a prolonged period of public judgment, finger-pointing, false confessions, DNA debates, and lawsuits. Almost 3 decades later, the case remains unresolved. The individual responsible remains unidentified. But what if the public has been asking the wrong questions? What if the answers lie in multiple directions, both inside the home and beyond its walls? This is not just a story about the events of that day. It is about analyzing the evidence, the behavior, and the lingering silence that often speaks louder than any note. Before we analyze the suspicions in the case, please tell me where you saw this video from. I will read it all and spread it to the world. On December 26, 1996, it started with a mother's voice on the phone reporting a kidnapping. Patsy Ramsey reported that her 6-year-old daughter, JonBenét, was gone. A ransom note had been left behind, demanding money and threatening severe consequences. But then, everything shifted. JonBenét wasn't missing. She was discovered under troubling circumstances at home. Just like that, this was no longer being treated as a simple abduction case, and suspicion turned inward onto the very people who had called for help. The perfect family portrait suddenly seemed fractured. Investigators noted no clear signs of forced entry, no indicative footsteps in the snow. If an unknown party was not involved, who remained? What sequence of events occurred that night? From the outside, the Ramseys appeared to be living the American dream. They resided at 755 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado, in a grand 7,000-square-foot mansion. In their community, they were more than well known. They were admired as a wealthy, charitable, church-going family of high standards and even higher appearances. John was a business mogul, Patsy, a former beauty queen, JonBenét, a child pageant participant, and Burke, the quiet son. JonBenét Ramsey was the picture of quiet success. A former Navy man, by 1996, he was the CEO of Access Graphics, a computer distribution company with over $1 billion in revenue. His Christmas bonus that year was $118,000. John was described as private, calculated, and calm. If John was the operational mind of the family, Patsy was the public face. A former Miss West Virginia, she brought energy and elegance to the Ramsey household and was deeply involved in the social life of Boulder's elite. Many described her as meticulous and image-conscious. She was the one who entered JonBenét into child beauty pageants, selecting her outfits and choreographing her routines. From the very first day JonBenét Ramsey was discovered, suspicion did not focus solely on an unknown intruder. It also fell upon the people inside the house. Over the years, this internal suspicion has spawned multiple theories, each pointing to a different member of the Ramsey household. One of the earliest theories is that John Ramsey was either directly involved or worked to conceal details of the incident. Much of this suspicion stems from his discovery of his daughter. According to case documents, the basement room where JonBenét was found was not obvious, yet John reportedly went straight to it. He also carried her body upstairs, an action that complicated later forensic review. Some have theorized he did this not out of panic, but because he was already aware of the situation and needed to control it. Others argue he was protecting someone else. The second major theory centers around Patsy Ramsey. Here, the narrative suggests she may have been involved in an altercation with JonBenét, perhaps after a bedwetting incident, that led to an unintended but critical outcome. According to this theory, she then staged a kidnapping to protect her family. The most frequently cited piece of evidence is the ransom note. Its length, tone, and the fact that it was written on paper from inside the home have led some to believe it was composed with time and care, which contradicts the behavior of a typical intruder under pressure. Then comes the theory that Burke Ramsey, JonBenét's 9-year-old brother, may have been involved. A potential household altercation, perhaps involving a flashlight, has been theorized by some investigators. Supporters of this theory point to perceived inconsistencies in his interviews and the presence of partially digested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach, which matched a bowl found in the kitchen that Burke was known to have been eating from. For some, it wasn't about pointing the finger at one person, but recognizing that perhaps the entire Ramsey family was involved in concealing the facts. This theory suggests that after the critical incident occurred, the family worked together, which would explain the ransom note, the handling of the scene, and their unified public narrative. The family's decision to retain legal counsel almost immediately and their carefully orchestrated media strategy added to this speculation. What remains unsettling is that all these conflicting theories stem from the exact same pool of evidence. The more the evidence is analyzed, the more questions seem to arise. It makes one wonder if the case has been interpreted correctly from the start. Few pieces of evidence have caused as much debate as the ransom note. On its surface, it appears to be a kidnapping demand. But a deeper look reveals what some consider a carefully constructed script, possibly written not to secure money, but to stage a false narrative. Most ransom notes are short and written in haste. This one spans 2.5 pages. It was written using a pen and notepad from inside the Ramsey home, with signs of practice drafts, implying the writer spent significant time composing it. What kind of intruder would risk so much time and exposure? The language of the note is also unusual, with phrases like, "We are a small foreign faction," and lines that seem to be inspired by 90s action films. The demand for $118,000 exactly matched John Ramsey's Christmas bonus, a detail an outside party would be unlikely to know. Handwriting analysis ruled out John Ramsey, but Patsy Ramsey was never definitively eliminated. Some forensic linguists have pointed to stylistic similarities between the note and her known writing samples. Most critically, the note failed to serve any practical purpose. There were no follow-up instructions, and JonBenét was already discovered under tragic circumstances when the note was found. This raises a critical question. If the note's purpose wasn't a ransom, what was it meant to do? A plausible interpretation is that it was designed to redirect blame and protect someone, perhaps someone inside the house. The question of how an intruder could have entered the home is also central to the case. A broken basement window, which John Ramsey claimed to have shattered months earlier, had a suitcase placed beneath it, as if used as a stepping stool. Yet, forensic evidence, such as undisturbed cobwebs, suggested the window had not been used for entry. It appeared staged. Other potential entry points, like a rear door or a basement door, were considered, but no solid proof or matching footprints were ever found. Weather reports confirmed snowfall that night, but police found no trail leading to or from the house. A boot print was found near where JonBenét was discovered, belonging to a brand of shoe that no family member reportedly owned. For a moment it seemed like a break in the case, but that hope faded as the extent of the scene's contamination became clear. Family, friends, and multiple officers had walked through the house before it was secured, potentially erasing any clear evidence. The forensic examination of JonBenét noted a complex and troubling set of circumstances. Medical reports described a major injury, and there were also signs consistent with restriction from an improvised mechanism found at the scene. The bindings themselves were described as staged elements. The forensic report also noted medical findings that remain subject to debate. Some experts interpreted these findings as possibly suggesting inappropriate contact, citing forensic anomalies in the clothing. However, other experts, along with the Ramsey family's representatives, strongly contested this interpretation, arguing that the evidence could be explained by benign, everyday causes. The autopsy estimated the critical incident occurred sometime during the late hours of Christmas night, or the early morning of the 26th. Partially digested pineapple in her stomach indicated she had eaten shortly before the event. Another point of debate was the presence of 2 small pairs of puncture-like marks found on her body. This led some investigators, most notably retired homicide detective Lou Smith, to propose that an electronic device may have been used to subdue her. Smith conducted experiments that he claimed replicated the marks. However, other renowned forensic pathologists, like Dr. Werner Spitz, strongly rejected this theory, stating the marks lacked the telltale signs of an electric shock. And most practically, no such device was ever found. From the moment Patsy Ramsey picked up the phone, investigators and forensic linguists have dissected every word she said. The call, which one would expect to be from a frantic, terrified mother, instead struck some analysts as calculated, rehearsed, and emotionally distant. Rather than stating directly that her daughter had been taken, Patsy Ramsey began her 911 call with the phrase, "We have a kidnapping." This choice of words immediately struck experts as oddly impersonal, almost like a press release instead of a desperate cry for help. She mentioned the ransom note before the child, saying, "There's a note left, and our daughter is gone," in that specific order. The phrasing alone raised questions about what was truly prioritized in her mind at that moment. Why was the focus not on JonBenét herself, but on an object? This subtle shift in focus may have revealed more than was intended. Even more telling was what wasn't said. Patsy never expressed fear that an intruder might still be in the house. She didn't mention the specific threats in the note, such as the warning not to call the police. For a mother who had just found a ransom letter, her decision to immediately call 911 seemed to contradict the very demands of the alleged kidnappers. This has led many to wonder, was there ever a real fear of retaliation? Or did she already know there would be none? Then there's the tone. Many experts have pointed out the surprising composure in Patsy's voice. There was a notable lack of sobbing, stuttering, or erratic pauses. Her voice was clear and, in some parts, oddly calm. Several times she said "please" to the dispatcher, a detail that some see as an effort to seem cooperative rather than a reflection of genuine panic. Perhaps the most debated part of the call isn't what she said while she thought someone was listening, but what was captured after she believed the line had been disconnected. A 6-second audio snippet at the end revealed what some audio experts believe to be 3 voices: Patsy, John, and a child, possibly Burke. Patsy is reportedly heard saying, "What did you do?" John says, "We're not speaking to you," and a faint child's voice responds. This audio has been used to challenge the family's claims that Burke had been asleep the entire time, although the FBI later concluded that the audio was inconclusive. Many independent analysts remain convinced the voices are real and significant. Additional questions arose from Patsy's physical behavior that morning. She made the 911 call from the kitchen, not from a location closer to JonBenét's room. According to some law enforcement reports, she changed clothes and applied makeup shortly after the call. This level of concern for appearance, right after reporting your child is missing, has been described by observers as unusual. Finally, the timing of the call itself is curious. The ransom note demanded they not contact authorities and set a payment window starting at 8 o'clock a.m. Patsy made the 911 call before 6 o'clock a.m., well outside that window. Was she ignoring the threat because she didn't believe it? Or, as some speculate, because she knew the threat wasn't real in the first place? DNA has been one of the most controversial and misunderstood elements in the JonBenét Ramsey case. Over nearly 3 decades, it has been used both as a tool for investigation and as a subject of public debate. But the closer investigators have looked, the more complicated the DNA narrative becomes. The first round of testing took place in December 1996. Biological samples revealed DNA from an unidentified source. Crucially, this profile didn't match anyone in the Ramsey family. At the time, this finding was kept relatively quiet, but it planted the seed of a theory. There was an unknown individual involved. In the years that followed, new techniques were used to reanalyze those original samples. Again, the DNA didn't match John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey, but no match was found in national databases either. Despite this result, a grand jury still voted to return an indictment against JonBenét's parents, though the district attorney chose not to prosecute. In 2008, came what many believed was a major breakthrough. Using a method called touch DNA, investigators once again tested JonBenét's clothing. The same unidentified male DNA was found in multiple places. The district attorney at the time, Mary Lacey, took this as confirmation of an intruder theory. She publicly cleared the Ramsey family and even sent John Ramsey a letter of apology. However, many in the forensic community weren't convinced. Critics argued that touch DNA can be unreliable, as it can be transferred during clothing production or packaging. Its presence doesn't necessarily mean that person had contact with the victim during the critical incident. In 2016, a closer reanalysis using more advanced methods showed something surprising. The DNA didn't belong to just one unknown male. It came from at least 2 different people, neither of whom were part of the Ramsey family. This revelation challenged everything. How could multiple unknown DNA profiles be explained by a lone intruder? It cast doubt on the theory that a single foreign DNA profile could resolve the case. At the same time, experts like James Kohler, a former lead investigator for the DA's office, began to warn that the focus on DNA was becoming a distraction. He pointed out that many of the materials connected to the incident, cords, tape, a broken paintbrush, came from inside the house. By 2021, authorities tried again with newer tools. Over 2,500 items were re-examined, involving more than 1,000 interviews and 21,000 leads. Still, no clear suspect emerged. Meanwhile, some researchers pointed out a serious problem. DNA was being used to rule out suspects, not to identify them. And in a case with such a compromised scene, many argued this was an oversimplification. Touch DNA doesn't tell you when it was left or how it was transferred. In the end, DNA in this case hasn't been the silver bullet many hoped for. It's confusing, incomplete, and potentially misleading. Rather than solving the mystery, it may have added another layer of complexity. It's no coincidence that suspicion has always gravitated toward the members of the Ramsey family. From the beginning, their words and actions, whether intentional or not, seemed to send conflicting signals. Each of them, in their own way, displayed behaviors or had histories that could be interpreted as relevant to the investigation. In the eyes of the public, Burke Ramsey, though just 9 years old at the time, has been a figure of intense speculation. His demeanor in interviews, both during childhood and as an adult, has frequently been noted. Most notably, his 2016 interview with Dr. Phil sparked public unease. Viewers were struck by Burke's light tone and lack of visible distress while discussing the events. While psychologists point out that such behavior could signal emotional detachment or a method of coping with trauma, it has fueled public curiosity. Investigators have also noted Burke's curious absence from the immediate chaos on the morning of December 26th, while his parents were making 911 calls and later discovering the circumstances in the basement. Burke reportedly remained in his room, claiming he slept through it all. Given the nature of the house, this explanation has been questioned. How could a child remain unaware amid such emotional upheaval? One of the most compelling physical clues tied to Burke is the pineapple bowl. JonBenét's autopsy revealed partially digested pineapple in her stomach, and a bowl containing pineapple and milk was found in the kitchen with Burke's fingerprints on it. However, both he and his parents denied remembering JonBenét having a late-night snack. A Maglite flashlight was also found on the kitchen counter, and its dimensions have been compared to the major injury noted in medical reports. A 2016 documentary explored the force needed to cause such an injury and concluded that a child of Burke's age could have wielded a similar object. Burke's history of what has been described as troubling behavior also adds to the narrative. He had previously hit JonBenét in the face with a golf club, a detail the family attributed to an accident. Reports also surfaced about other behavioral issues that some child psychologists interpret as signs of deep-seated emotional issues. Combined with a household dynamic that heavily favored JonBenét's pageant career, it's possible Burke felt overlooked. One speculative theory suggests that innocent childhood interactions may have crossed into inappropriate territory. According to this speculation, any actions by Burke were not born of malice, but of confusion. It proposes that the parents may have been aware of some form of troubling interaction between their children, felt shame, and never addressed it properly. In the end, Burke Ramsey's role in this case remains a matter of intense debate. While no definitive proof has ever surfaced, the circumstantial evidence and behavioral cues have kept public suspicion alive for decades. For Patsy Ramsey, the narrative is equally complex. According to Linda Hoffman-Pugh, the Ramseys' longtime housekeeper, Patsy began acting erratically in the time leading up to the incident. She reportedly became moody and easily upset over minor things. Several objects found at the scene point to someone familiar with the house layout. A Swiss Army knife was discovered near JonBenét, which Hoffman-Pugh stated she had previously hidden in a closet only Patsy would typically access. The blanket covering JonBenét was also noted to have come from a specific load of laundry that only Patsy would have known about. The ransom note was written on paper from inside the Ramsey home, using a pen from Patsy's desk. Multiple independent handwriting experts later said it was highly probable that Patsy wrote the note, yet she reportedly never provided a formal handwriting sample for comparison. The improvised mechanism found at the scene was made from Patsy's own broken paintbrush. Experts concluded it was too complex for a 9-year-old to build, yet a grown man wouldn't need such a device to overpower a small child. This led many to believe it was made by someone with less physical strength, like a woman, as part of a deliberate staging. Patsy was the one who claimed to discover the ransom note and called 911. But rather than searching the house first, she was reportedly dressed and had applied makeup when police arrived. The circumstances of JonBenét's discovery, cleaned and wrapped in a blanket, are seen by some experts as signs of staging, where a loved one tries to cover up an incident while also showing care for the individual. From the beginning, the Ramseys resisted full cooperation with police, delaying formal interviews. One widely discussed theory is that JonBenét may have been hurt in a moment of frustration, and Patsy panicked, staging a kidnapping to cover up what really happened. John Ramsey is the least publicly discussed figure, but several points have raised questions. Teachers reportedly noticed that JonBenét had become unusually clingy with her mother in the weeks leading up to the incident. Experts in child psychology suggest that such sudden changes can indicate emotional distress. Records also show that multiple phone calls were made to JonBenét's pediatrician on December 17th, the same day she won a beauty pageant that her father had attended. The autopsy results also raise serious questions, noting medical findings that remain subject to debate, including some that forensic experts determined may have occurred 7 to 10 days prior to her death. While some argued these could be the result of post-mortem staging or hygiene practices, others insisted they pointed to a pattern of inappropriate contact. Suspicious events also took place just days before the incident. On December 23rd, a 911 call was placed from the Ramsey home but was abruptly disconnected. When police arrived, a family friend refused them entry. On Christmas night, after leaving a party, only John was alone with JonBenét in the car during a brief stop. A few hours later, the 911 call was made. John Ramsey's own behavior has also drawn scrutiny. He admitted to breaking the basement window months earlier, the very same window later cited as a possible entry point for an intruder. Moreover, John was the person who discovered JonBenét. Rather than leaving the scene untouched for forensic analysis, he carried her upstairs an action that complicated the work of investigators. He also did not initially participate in the search for his daughter. It wasn't until a family friend encouraged him to check the basement that the discovery was made. This apparent reluctance has led some to believe he already knew where she was. These theories suggest that Patsy may have only helped with the cover-up, possibly writing the ransom note, while John may have been the central figure. For many experts, the threat of exposure can lead to desperate acts. When viewed together, these details, behavioral changes, unexplained medical findings, suspicious phone calls, and John's peculiar actions, form a troubling mosaic. The final analysis, with the accumulation of evidence pointing inward, suggests a plausible theory remains that an altercation involving Burke may have unintentionally led to the critical outcome, consistent with his documented behavioral issues. Patsy Ramsey's personality traits do not, on their own, present a convincing portrait of an individual capable of such an act. Her inconsistent interviews point more toward panic than premeditation. The improvised mechanism, complex and methodical, was likely not the work of a child. It fits more with an adult's attempt to deflect suspicion by creating a narrative of a violent assault. The ransom note, believed by many experts to have been written by Patsy, is another layer of incredibly complex theatrics. These elements together paint a picture not of an outside intruder, but of a family tragedy that spiraled completely out of control. It's possible that both Patsy and John chose to protect their surviving son rather than report a potential accident. Could they have conspired to create the complicated ransom note, staging an abduction and distorting the timeline? John's delayed discovery of his daughter, Patsy's link to the ransom note through handwriting analysis, and both parents' lack of full cooperation with police in the early stages all suggest a calculated effort to shield Burke from consequences, an effort born not from malice, but perhaps from a desperate need to protect their remaining child. Another theory, more disturbing and less substantiated, points toward the possibility of prior, inappropriate contact involving John Ramsey. Autopsy findings revealed medical findings that remain subject to debate, which some forensic experts interpreted as indicative of chronic, sensitive issues. If JonBenét had showed any signs of intending to disclose such a situation, it could have provided a powerful and terrifying motive. However, the DNA evidence recovered from her clothing was inconclusive, traced to unidentified male profiles, but not definitively linked to John. This ambiguity keeps the theory alive in public discourse, though it lacks firm evidentiary backing. The idea of a parent acting to silence a child remains speculative, built more on circumstantial flags and behavioral interpretations than hard forensic fact. Another branch of speculation suggests that the Ramsey family may not have acted alone. If we accept that multiple unidentified DNA profiles were found on JonBenét's clothing, alongside the unexplained boot print and the debated marks on her skin, then the idea of outside involvement becomes harder to dismiss. What if someone from outside the family was brought in, not to commit the original act, but to help conceal it? One individual often cited is Gary Oliver, a person with a prior criminal record who lived just blocks from the Ramsey home. According to police records, he frequented the area. He was arrested in the early 2000s and found in possession of a photograph of JonBenét alongside other troubling materials. Years later, Oliver wrote a disturbing letter from prison with statements that some have interpreted as a confession. Some theorists believe he may have had a connection to the Ramseys and could have been involved after the initial incident to stage the scene to resemble a different kind of crime. If this individual was truly involved, it raises a chilling question. Was there a gap in time between the initial injury and later actions? And did someone else finalize the act? Another figure of interest is Michael Helguth, who worked at an auto salvage yard near the Ramsey residence. He reportedly told friends he was about to make money from a big job around Christmas 1996. A pair of high-tech boots matching the footprint found near JonBenét was reportedly the type Helgoth often wore. Days after the DA publicly stated they were closing in on the responsible party, Helgoth was found deceased from a gunshot wound in what was reported as a suicide, a timing some have called suspicious. Investigators later found stun gun equipment in his residence, which aligns with the theory that such a device was used on JonBenét. While these theories remain unproven, they reflect a darker possibility, that someone outside the Ramsey home helped twist a family tragedy into a calculated deception. In the end, the case of JonBenét Ramsey remains one of the most haunting unsolved cases in American history, not because of a lack of evidence, but because so much evidence has led nowhere. Decades have passed, thousands of pages of reports have been written, and experts have been consulted, yet no indictment has stuck, and no definitive answer has been found. It's a chilling reminder that even with time, science, and public obsession, the truth can remain elusive. The name JonBenét Ramsey still captures headlines, but for reasons no child should be remembered. She became a symbol of tragedy and the painful limits of our legal system. One of the most profound lessons from this case is how unchecked speculation can become a weapon. The investigation fractured not because of a lack of leads, but because every lead was buried under layers of noise. Competing agendas and public obsession turned a search for truth into a spectacle, and in doing so, they left behind what mattered most: a 6-year-old girl who never received justice. It's also easy to forget that Burke Ramsey was just a child, only 9 years old, when his little sister was discovered under troubling circumstances in their family home. He was not charged or officially named a suspect, yet in the court of public opinion, Burke has faced a life sentence of suspicion. As he grew up, every smile and every word was dissected. He wasn't allowed to mourn his sister freely or live a life unchained from the shadows of that Christmas night. The constant scrutiny is a haunting kind of cruelty. Whether he was involved or simply in the wrong house at the wrong time, Burke was a child who deserved a chance to grow up without having to answer for the crime of being someone's brother. For parents, this case is a reminder that children need presence and protection, not just from outside dangers, but from the pressures that can quietly grow within the walls of a family home. JonBenét's story isn't just about a crime, it's about everything that may have failed her before that final night. Protecting a child means more than hiding a difficult truth. It means confronting the uncomfortable, even when it's inside your own home. Because the worst pain is not scandal or shame. It's losing the very person you were supposed to protect. As we reflect on this case, a complex web of evidence, theories, and human behavior, we are left with more questions than answers. What do you believe happened in the Ramsey home that night? When a family's story is shattered, where does the responsibility lie? With those inside the home, with the investigators who handled the scene, or with a public that demands answers at any cost? If you were faced with an unimaginable tragedy, how would you navigate the line between protecting your family and seeking the truth? This case forces us to look into the mirror and ask what justice truly means when the path to it is so profoundly broken.